Let's take a look at some charts on Decred for Brave New Coin. So I always like to go to the project's Twitter, see what's happening, see what's the latest news and events. So they released version 1.6 in late January. Some updates to the treasury stuff, staking stuff, private transaction stuff, Lightning Network integration. So Decred has a DAO-like treasury. It's got a dev subsidy. It's got proof of work, proof of stake. It slices, it dices. It's got a DEX, I think. At this point, all these projects confuse me between what they can and can't do. For the most part, what every project is trying to do is literally everything it can to get market share, which is normal and fine and good. That just doesn't mean that all of them do it well. I like this website the most out of any DCR thing I'm about to show you because it is transparent and tells you exactly what's going on. It tells you the proof of work reward, proof of stake reward, the dev subsidy per block. Tells you how much is mined, tells you how much. It even uses the word pre-mine. It says exactly what it is. It doesn't hide it. It doesn't try to hide it. So yes, DCR had a pre-mine. Yes, DCR is a code base fork. I encourage you to Google that if you disagree with me. Have fun Googling that one. But yes, it is a code base fork. That is not a bad thing at all. It is what it is. It is highly related to Bitcoin in many ways, especially with the 21 million cap. A lot of Bitcoiners dislike altcoins but love Decred. That's how similar it is to Bitcoin. If we look at the top 500 Decred addresses, the rich list is always interesting to go through if it's available for any coin, which it should. It's a public ledger, or if it's a public ledger. Monero isn't going to have a rich list, but everything else will for the most part. Dev Fund has most of the money. Some big mining stuff up here. And if you keep scrolling, most of the top 100 wallets are, if they're exchanges, they're Bittrex or Poloniex, and Genesis Mining is a big player as well. So Polo and Bittrex have a ton of Decred, which makes sense because that's where most of the early trading happened for Decred. Not so much anymore. Binance has Decred trading available, but according to the rich list, it's not picked up. So my guess is Binance is in here somewhere, and it's just not labeled. But there's no way it's something like this is traded on Binance and it's not in the rich list. If we look at the proof of stake ticket prices, price goes up with supply and demand, and the more tickets you're able to buy, the higher the likelihood you're able to get the reward. And in general, it's going up and to the right. Prices are getting more expensive, supplies at X value, and demand is increasing, so price goes up, which is bullish if you like a system like this. And we can see all the miners here, the pool fees, and all this stuff. Proof of stake tries to be different in different ways. EOS has validators, Tezos has bakeries, but at the end of the day, for the most part, it all has to do with sort of representative democracy type situation where you're putting your votes or your DCR behind a specific pool based on whatever you want, geographic distribution, based on fees, which is probably a big one, based on who you know, what you trust, that sort of thing. Decred Brazil here. So they take a cut and then you get the rest of it. That's how it works. It's always good to know how much of this is decentralized globally, how much is decentralized based on their best interests. Seeing Bittrex on here is fine, but seeing 10 exchanges on here would be bad, right? Because then there'd be an exchange glut, and their decision-making process is likely different than the general user's decision-making process. So the more decentralization, the better. And because it's proof of work, proof of stake, we can have a centralized proof of stake, we can have a centralized proof of work, but it's going to be hard to 51% attack coin collectively. Seeing two coins with over 50% of the total pools for the cred would be troublesome for anything else that was strictly proof of work. Not as troublesome in this case. Ideally, though, you see solo miners as a large percentage of the proof of work slice. That's not the case with pretty much any proof of work coin. That's just kind of how it is. If we look at the hash rate for Decred, it's been basically stable, flat, nothing too crazy. Slightly up recently with price, but overall remains pretty flat. And difficulty also fairly flat, rising, kind of, I guess, probably new all-time highs here. I'd have to zoom way out to check, but my guess is hash rate and difficulty did hit an all-time high mid-March, probably when price did. I mentioned the DAO-like treasury proposal system. This is it here, Polyatia. I don't know why nothing is currently being voted on or discussed, but you can see everything that's been approved, rejected, abandoned, what it is. A lot of it's marketing stuff, some of it's development stuff. All in all, as long as it involves community and increasing awareness, I don't have a problem with it personally. I think this is the hard part, right? Like putting out some of the block reward for stuff like this is fine, but actually figuring out what to do with it and how to pay people, that's the difficult part. So I like the dev subsidy. I like the paying for proposals like this. Definitely makes sense to me. If you look at the mining profitability for the Blake 256 algorithm, you can see a lot of these miners are making a lot of money. That's 2B. Let's see. Blake 25. Okay, so a lot of these miners are making really good money on 4 cents per kilowatt hour with the Decred prices up here, even though it's not strictly a proof of work network. There hasn't been a new Blake 256 miner since July 2019, so it's hard to really know how much of this hardware still exists, because at this point it's getting almost 3 years old, some of this stuff. Nevertheless, miners doing well. You can always mine with GPU, CPU, so it's not really that big of a deal as far as the network. If no ASICs exist, the networks aren't going to disappear. If they're proof of work, there's always other means to mine this stuff. The global GPU shortage is partially due to crypto and Ethereum, really, but GPUs can mine pretty much anything. If we compare Dash and Decred, which to me are basically cousins, they're very similar. They have a treasury, they have dev subsidy, they have privacy capabilities. They're hybrid proof of work, proof of stake. They have master nodes. DCR doesn't quite have master nodes, but they're very similar. So it's always worth checking out. Is there an imbalance here that doesn't make sense? This market cap has been converging slowly, but it's been converging over the past few months as Decred has crept up significantly. You can see Decred higher in transaction volume and fees, lower in transactions per day and daily active addresses. So DCR has fewer transactions but higher transaction volumes than Dash. And GitHub commits are kind of just on here. Basically, they're equal. There's not like a massive imbalance here. It's always good to check out the development side of things when you're comparing coins. If we look at the transaction count and the average transaction values, the transaction counts have exploded and they are all over the place. So this tells me, be careful taking this seriously. This could be mining, this could be botnet, I don't really know. It could be a billion different things, but obviously it's changed since October, November. Everything's gone way up along with price, which is natural. Speculation is going to fuel on-chain activity. And average transaction values, I believe, are an all-time high. Bigly, massive high there for average transaction values. So it's hard to deny the bullishness there. Transactions per day aren't quite at an all-time high, but they're close. And that's saying something for this, for Decred, which basically had very few transactions for a long period of time, which just kind of languished. If you compare this to other networks in general, Decred has very few transactions. So it's a bit weird. Fewer transactions, higher transaction value. If we look at NVT pushing all-time lows thanks to that big bump in on-chain activity. Active addresses hitting all-time highs. So some of this is speculation, some of this is new people getting in, some of this is just changes in how the network functions from previously. So it's hard to compare. This looks incredibly bullish, obviously. Active addresses at all-time high, NVT at all-time low, which is an inverse metric of economic activity, utility. But if a network has changed in a function in some way, then this should look different. And it's hard to compare apples to apples here when the network just has new functionality and new ways of doing on-chain activity. So yes, it's bullish, but you sort of need time to compare itself to itself. MVRV, it's not something I usually look at for Decred, but another one of these inverse metrics of economic utility. It measures market cap over realized cap, which is how much on-chain activity there is. And historically, anything between 2 and 2.5 has basically been the high for price. It's basically when price gets way ahead of the on-chain activity. It's currently, so price is way up, obviously, and MVRV is just was pushing in the mid 2s, and now it's back down to 1.5. So even though price is screaming up here, MVRV says historically this is okay. But once again, on-chain activity changes if you change how the network functions. So it's difficult to compare this to 2018. It's a different network that has different functionality and capabilities. So maybe the new normal is 2, maybe it's 1.5. Not really sure until we have more time to look at the data. We get more data points to compare to the new network functionalities. Decred, past 5 years, Google Trends, not too much has happened over the past 2-3 years. Google Trends did creep up a little bit with price. I suspect if price if price pushes much higher, then Google Trends will spike up significantly as you just get more and more articles and exchange listings and FOMO and hype on anything Google Trends follows. So for this specifically, I wouldn't consider it a leading indicator, but if Google Trends pops before price, then you can say, all right, there's a bullish divergence there. I'm expecting price to increase significantly as there's more and more activity. Now the chart itself is a bit comical. 5200 yearly pivots, VPVR, RSI volume. This is Polo. It's got the most data. It's the oldest traded. The volume profile is going to be messed up because very few people actually trade on Polo anymore. So it's a bit of a give and take here, but price did hit an all-time high on a bearish divergence. So there was clearly lack in momentum there at the top. But this is, I don't know what angle this is, above 45 degrees. It looks comical. It looks like somebody painted this on and just said, all right, we're going up now. And there was some talk about corporations or whoever investing in this, but I don't really know how truthful that is. What I do know is it's over 2x from the 200-day moving average. So at this point, it's probably going to need to consolidate or relax a bit before moving higher. These MAs need time to catch up. It's above the R5 yearly pivot, and it's only March, almost April here. Yearly pivots print the first of the year based on previous year's price action. So whatever expectations there were for Decred in the previous year have just been blown out of the water very, very quickly here. Volume support isn't popping up until $30, which is a massive drawdown from here. Price will need to normalize 190, it probably needs to retest the previous all-time highs. This isn't a chart that I personally would want to take a long on because it's just obviously whatever percentage this is. It's over 10x since October. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. If you're a Decred maximalist, good for you. But this isn't a chart that I want to jump in anytime soon until it pulls back significantly. So maybe you buy 100, maybe by 90, the R3 yearly pivot, but ultimately where I'd want to be buying is at the 200-day moving average. The daily cloud has actually captured this quite well. You had your Kumo breakout in November. You had a Kijun bounce in December, and that's pretty much all she wrote up until current price. There is a bit of a TK C-clamp, TK disequilibrium, suggesting a mean reversion to 117. If that fails, we could print a head and shoulders here, which would break down closer to that 200-day moving average. It's setting up for an edge-to-edge move with a short entry from 145 to 100, basically. This edge of the cloud to this edge of the cloud. All of this collectively is suggesting to me, again, mean reversion. It's going to need to relax. It's going to need to let the averages catch up to price. Overall, though, on the cloud, it might look comical on the 50 and the 200 on the daily, but the cloud doesn't look like it's screaming for a mean reversion or anything like that. It just looks like this needs to relax a little bit. So I like 117. I like 100. I like 75. Decred BTC, as bullish as USD looks, the BTC pair basically has been on a downfall since 2018, and it found some buyers on the previous capitulative V from 2016. Not many charts even have data that low or data that old, but here we are. A bunch of volume support came in, and it's mean reverted to the highest volume area on the chart, at least for Poloniex. So I like higher highs at any of the VPVR levels here. 004 is good, and ultimately 01 is always a good psychological resistance. That it certainly isn't an expectation. It's just if we go higher, that's where we're going. 04, 01, those are the two levels I'd be watching. Sorry, 004 and 01. But consolidating here for an extended period of time would make the most sense to me. Let the moving averages catch up, let some accumulation happen, possibly print some sort of inverted head and shoulders, making the right shoulder down here. But as with the USD pair, probably just needs to relax. And then for funsies, just to compare the decred and dash charts, just to show, again, decred is creeping up rather quickly on dash here. So that's all I have for decred. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, dislike, subscribe, share, and happy trading.